Hi everyone, I'm Catherine, the artist behind Bigelow Fine Arts. This week's tutorial is a butterfly and carnation in graphite. I'm working on Bristol vellum. I have the reference photo, detailed equipment list, and line art available on my Patreon page for free. I'll have a card pop up with the link for that. I also have the equipment listed below in the show notes, as well as more information available on my blog. The link is also below in the show notes. This piece took me a lot longer than I expected for several reasons. One being that I forgot how slow graphite could be. I really took my time to build up the layers to get a smooth laydown of graphite. The second being I went in too dark on the background and had to lighten it back up. The third being that I moved house and studio right near the end of this piece. Not a fun process, and we had no internet for way too long. I began on the background using a 9H and worked my way down to an H. I ended up going over the background with a kneaded eraser to lighten it up and reworked it in an 8H to smooth out the eraser marks. I'm using several different brands of pencil, which will make it a little easier to tell if I'm working with a hard, medium, or soft pencil. The black pencils with orange top are Derwent Graphic pencils. I have the 9H, 8H, 6H, and 4H. The turquoise pencils are an old set of barrel pencils, which I think is now Prismacolor Turquoise. I'm using the 2H and H. Finally, the softest pencils are the green Faber Castell 9000 series, the HB, B, 2B, 4B, 6B, and 8B. I also have the 9B from Derwent that I used a little right near the end to get my darkest values. While I do have a great range of hardnesses, I did also use a blending stump to smooth out the graphite. Just working on the background alone took over 10 hours, and that doesn't include the time to erase most of it and rework it at the end. The butterfly and carnation took another 14 hours, and several more hours fiddling and fine-tuning the contrast and values, making sure my edges were sharp and each petal well defined. This background is very repetitive, so I have it going faster than usual. Here though, I slowed down a section to normal time so you can see just how long it takes to lay down the graphite. I'm working in elongated ovals to avoid harsh start and stop lines as I fill in the background. This is a large piece and took quite some time to do, and I wanted to do it right. I know that when I watch speed drawing videos and tutorials, I get a false impression of how long or short things take. So this is my real speed, slow and steady. Generally, I work my backgrounds from top left to bottom right before doing the main subject, but this time I worked right to left on the background, then bottom up for the flower before finally working on the butterfly. I worked this way as it seemed to be going from easiest to hardest. I had glassine taped across my work to prevent smudging and to protect my work, and I moved it around to make sure I had adequate coverage. The background continues on for quite some time, given it took about 10 hours. If you want to skip ahead, the next part begins around 7 minutes. I am currently sitting in a room piled with empty boxes and no internet, so no way to get rid of them. Even moving to a bigger town didn't get us internet right away. We ended up being that one house not currently hooked up to the public system, so of course we have to wait a couple of weeks for them to hook us up. Luckily we are a two-story and they can go over the road and not dig up the road. Who knows how long that would have taken. Then we have to get the company out to actually connect us to the system. Once we can get internet, I can Craigslist a ton of boxes and get more space. My easel is currently perched on the corner of the dining table with my tripod crammed into the back corner. Hopefully this setup will work for recording. Guess I'll find out soon enough. I have to say that I am always impressed by the tutorials where artists are able to keep up a near constant stream of dialogue, not only describing what they are doing, but also dropping lots of tips and tricks. My hat goes off to them, as I just can't find my way to do that. So I apologize for the blocks of silence and my inability to find something to say to fill it. At least you don't have to listen to any annoying music. I moved the camera in for a close shot of this section of the background to show how lightly using a blending stump can help smooth out variations in pressure and give a smoother look. Even working gradually and building up from hard to soft, I still have variation in how the graphite lays down, and using the blending stump gives a smoother, more uniform appearance than I needed here in my background. When I use the stump on the butterfly and flower, I am careful to make sure I go back and sharpen up my edges so everything looks sharp and defined, and not one big blurry mess. There is a time and a place for blurry, and this wasn't one of them. Even with the blending stump on the background, I went back with a sharp pencil to make sure my edges were crisp. I worked the flower starting with the base, as that was the easiest place to start. I built up the values slowly, just as I had on the background to get a smooth coverage. By building up in this manner, I am making sure that I fill in the tooth of the paper and not have any little white specks showing through in my dark sections. I use the blending stump as needed to smooth out any variations and to make sure I have the tooth of the paper filled in as best I can. At this point, it's a layering process. I just go through and I keep layering and layering, trying to build up all of my values as needed. For the petals, I worked them up one at a time, starting on the outer, more well-defined petals, focusing on the shapes and values to prevent myself from getting lost in the detail of the petals. My reference was pretty good, but a little blurry, so I had to take some artistic license to sharpen things up and make everything cleaner. The flower was a slow process to block in all the shapes and make sure the petals all looked like petals. I really had to take my time here, as it was easy to get lost in the outline and where I was in my reference. Working one petal at a time really helped me to keep track of my place in the reference and to also help prevent my going through an ugly stage for too long. Working up the flower as a whole would have been exhausting and much more harder for me to do. After blocking in the petals, I will still have to go back over the entire flower to darken my darks and hype up my contrast. It is easier to do this once everything is blocked in and as close to what I need as possible. This makes things stand out more as to whether I went dark enough in the shadows or if my petals are folding in the correct direction. As I filled in the outer petals, I also went back and added more depth and shape to the base of the flower to make it stand out better against the petals. I worked up the two wings differently while trying to find a good way to keep my spots without losing the outline. For the first section of wing, I worked up the spots to where I wanted them before blocking in the wing. While this helped me keep track of where the spots were going to be, I also had to be careful when blending to not smudge my spots into a blurry mess. On the next section of wing, I tried to work the wing more as a whole, and that seemed to make blending easier while also not losing track of where my spots needed to be. There are pros and cons to each method, and while both worked well for me, I'm not sure I have a favorite preference. After I had the wings blocked in, I went back through with my Tombow mono eraser to add in some of the little white highlights and scars that appear on the wing. Certainly a lot easier to go back and remove the graphite than to try to work around them. I worked up the wings in sections before working on the body and fixing the legs. The body has fur on the upper section, so I had to make sure I had a sharp pencil and followed the direction of the fur. In some places, the fur is pointing towards the viewer and appears as spots. The legs were really fiddly, and I had to make sure I had them well defined to not blend in with the petals. I worked some of the petals a little darker to help the lighter legs stand out more against the petals. Because of the background in general, I worked the butterfly and carnation darker than the reference to help it stand out more from the tribal swirls I wanted. I learned that if I am not going to Photoshop my reference and background together, I need to keep the background light until my main subject is in place to determine if I need to go darker or to keep it light. I have the final picture at the end showing how it turned out once I lightened up the background. I took the picture in bright early morning light with the light coming in at about a 45-degree angle to the picture that seemed to help prevent shine off the darkest parts of the piece. This picture has been converted to black and white to remove some of the artifacts of the camera. If you liked this tutorial, please hit the subscribe button to stay informed of when new videos go up. I generally post weekly, but until I get unpacked and more settled, videos will likely be a little less frequent. Thanks for watching.